Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking Surah Maryam, the 19th chapter of the Quran. But listen, we're not just looking at this as some piece of ancient literature. No, we're setting the stage for a story about a text that literally saved lives. Just imagine for a second possessing a sequence of words so powerful, so perfectly tailored to a specific moment in time, that just reciting them out loud could instantly turn a hostile foreign ruler into your absolute greatest protector. Well, that's exactly what we're exploring today. Let's get right into it. To really grasp the sheer weight of this text, we have to look at the incredibly desperate situations surrounding its revelation. So, early Muslims in Mecca were facing brutal, unimaginable torture. Some, like the companion Kebab, were having their skin literally burned away with hot iron. I mean, this was a true life-or-death historical moment. The Prophet Muhammad actually advised a small group of his followers, we're talking about a dozen or so people here, to flee across the sea to Abyssinia, which is modern-day East Africa, to seek asylum under a Christian king. They were hunted, they were terrified, and honestly, they desperately needed a miracle just to survive. Okay, let's dive into this timeline. It's the 5th year of prophethood. The Muslim refugees have fled to Africa, but their Meccan persecutors are right on their heels. The Meccans actually send these slick envoys, completely loaded with bribes for the king's ministers, basically trying to orchestrate this intense court showdown. So they stand before the Christian king, the Negus, and explicitly accuse the refugees of being criminals who mock the Christian faith. Naturally, the king turns to the refugees and demands to know what they actually believe about Jesus, or Isa. The Muslims are cornered. They're facing extradition and, quite frankly, certain death. So they choose Ja'far to speak on their behalf. But here's the thing. He doesn't argue. He doesn't debate. He simply recites. Ja'far begins reciting the newly revealed words of Surah Maryam. And as these verses echo through the royal court, this incredibly climactic moment unfolds. The Christian king actually begins to weep. I mean, tears are just streaming down his face. He picks up this tiny little piece of straw from the ground and utters that incredible quote you're seeing right there. He turns and tells the Meccan envoys to take their bribes and just leave. Just like that, the refugees win absolute safety. Historical accounts actually tell us that this single recitation altered the entire course of their lives forever. It's wild. But, it makes you wonder, what exactly made these specific words so deeply resonant? Well, to answer that, we really have to look at how the surah was brilliantly organized. Think of it as a perfectly tailored parting gift for these Muslims migrating to a Christian land. It's split into 3 parts. Part 1 focuses on the miraculous births of John the Baptist, Yahya, and Jesus, or Isa. Right away, this creates an immediate bridge of shared reverence with the Christian king. Then the middle section shifts focus to Abraham, right? A figure who is universally revered by both Christians and the pagan Meccans. And finally, part 3 addresses the Meccans directly. It is, without a doubt, an absolute masterclass in audience awareness and rhetorical structure. The chapter kicks off with something that would literally stop 7th century Arabs right in their tracks, a series of mysterious, disjointed letters. Kaf Haya, Ain Sad. Now, keep in mind, the Quran was revealed at the absolute peak of Arabic linguistic eloquence. The Arabs out there prided themselves on their poetry. So to hear someone speaking normally and then suddenly enunciate this majestic string of disconnected, drawn-out letters, it commanded instant attention. It was a massive signal that something incredibly profound was about to follow. Right after that, the very next line translates to, a mention of the mercy of your Lord to his servant Zakariya. But hold on, notice what's missing there? The word Quran or book isn't actually explicitly stated. In most chapters that start with those disjointed letters, the word Quran usually immediately follows. But here, by subtly omitting it and instead using the word zikr, which means mention or remembrance, the text implicitly trains the listener to focus entirely on the action. It pulls your attention right to the profound mercy being bestowed, rather than just pointing to the physical book itself. It's such a brilliant little detail. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is the microscopic linguistic brilliance used to describe Zakariya's prayer. Check this out. The text doesn't use the standard word dua, which generally means calling out to someone you know is listening. Instead, it uses nida, and nida implies calling out from the absolute depths of your heart in complete and utter desperation. It's like when you are so completely overwhelmed that you just cry out into the void. But then, the text adds that he did this lightly and quietly. So think about that. He was basically screaming internally with desperation, yet physically making this silent, agonizing prayer that literally only the divine could hear. So Zakariya is pleading for a child, right? But he actually begins by painting this incredibly vivid portrait of his own physical fragility. He doesn't just come out and say, hey, I'm old. Instead, he says his bones have become worn out, and he uses this beautiful, poetic Arabic metaphor. He says his head has flared up with white hair. The root word there actually implies a fire flaming up. He's essentially saying that the white in his hair is aggressively consuming the black, exactly like a wildfire devours everything in its path. It's just a deeply, deeply humbling statement of his own vulnerability. And then he goes on to reveal the true root of his anxiety. He's terrified his extended family won't properly carry on the faith after he dies, and to complicate matters, his wife is unable to bear children. But look really closely at the word choice here. He calls his wife Akir, which means she hasn't been able to carry a child, rather than Akim, which means permanently, biologically barren. You see the difference? Even in his extreme old age, facing what look like absolutely impossible odds, he deliberately chooses a word that leaves the door wide open for hope and divine intervention. Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand why Zakariya is so desperate for an heir in the first place. Listen, he wasn't asking for a child to pass on material wealth or anything like that. Historically speaking, prophets leave all their worldly possessions as charity anyway. No, he was making a purely spiritual investment to preserve his legacy of faith. He wanted a son to inherit his spiritual wisdom, his foresight, and really to keep his legacy of service alive. His motives were 100% rooted in preserving the message of Tawheed for the next generation. So the crucial point is how the divine responds to this agonizing plea. And the answer? It's literally instantaneous. There isn't even a transition word like "and then" used in the text. The prayer is just immediately followed by the good news. The text reveals that Allah instantaneously bestows upon him a son and even personally names him Yahya. Guys, this is massive because the text specifically notes that this was an entirely unprecedented, divinely chosen name. It had never been given to a single person before him. Talk about a mark of absolute distinction. Of course, upon hearing this, Zakariya expresses some very real, very human shock. I mean, he asks how on earth this is possible, given that his wife hasn't been able to have children, and he has officially crossed all the extreme limits of old age. But scholars note something super important here. This wasn't out of doubt or lack of faith. Think about it. When you get unimaginably good news, what's your first reaction? You ask for details. You're like, wait, seriously? No way. How? Zakariya just possessed this beautiful desire to prolong this incredibly joyous conversation with the divine. After that, Zakariya asks for a sign, and he's told that his sign will be that he won't be able to speak for 3 nights. And this brilliantly illustrates the literary consistency of the Quran. You see, this exact same story of Zakariya is also told over in Surah Ali Imran. But over there, the sign is silence for 3 days. So why the subtle difference? Well, the tone of Surah Maryam is much darker, right? It's focused on frail bones, deep desperation, and this silent, hidden prayer in the dark. So nights is the absolute perfect thematic fit. Ali Imran, on the other hand, has a lighter, more hopeful daytime tone, hence the use of days. The thematic consistency across these chapters is just stunning. From there, the text transitions rapidly to the miraculous childhood of Yahya. The narrative intentionally skips all the unnecessary filler details, jumping right to the moment Yahya is commanded to take hold of the scripture with pure determination. We find out he was actually granted profound, deep wisdom before even hitting puberty. It's wild. A level of spiritual maturity that you'd normally only associate with deep adulthood was just handed to him as a young boy. He is then described with this incredible word hanan. It's such a beautiful, complex term that basically means deep, overwhelming affection. To give you an idea linguistically, it's used to describe the absolute unparalleled love a mother has for her child, or even the mournful cry of a camel desperately longing for its owner. The text tells us that Yahya possessed this intense, gentle tenderness as a special, direct gift from Allah. It made him just incredibly empathetic towards everyone around him. And to complement that immense outward affection, Yahya is also described with the word zakat. Now, while a word like nadafa refers to basic external cleanliness, like washing your hands off, zakat refers to pure internal purity. It means Yahya had this completely spotless, charitable state of the heart. He was basically internally flawless in his character. And these traits weren't random. They were divine gifts specifically given to ensure that this child, born to such elderly parents, would be perfectly equipped to lovingly care for them. Because here's the thing, this intense spirituality wasn't just some theoretical concept. It connected directly to his practical, everyday family life.
The text specifically makes it a point to highlight that he was remarkably dutiful to his parents and was never a disobedient tyrant. Think about it. Because his parents were so incredibly old and frail, they could have easily been taken advantage of by a strong young son. But Yahya's total lack of arrogance, combined with that deep affection we talked about, completely protected his vulnerable parents. It really shows us that true spirituality is reflected first and foremost in how you treat the people under your own roof.
Let's move along and see how this all builds, because the pacing here is brilliant. The entire story of Yahya acts as this deliberate narrative warm-up. It's kind of like faith on training wheels, you know? By first establishing that the divine can easily bring a child from parents who are way past the biological limits of age, the text is actually preparing the listener's mind for an even greater ultimate miracle, one that is going to defy biology entirely.
And that, of course, brings us to the absolute focal point of the chapter, Maryam, or Mary. The text introduces her by detailing this noble, very deliberate seclusion. She withdraws from her family to an eastern place. But I want to be clear, she doesn't abandon her family out of neglect or anger. No, she purposefully takes time out to retreat, completely disconnect from the endless noise of society, and dedicate herself entirely to individual worship and intense spiritual focus. To really ensure that focus, the text says she took a hijab or a screen in seclusion from them. And listen, this wasn't merely just a physical curtain being hung up for the fun of it. It was a deeply intentional psychological barrier specifically erected to block out any worldly distractions from her connection with the divine. She knew that to truly, deeply connect with the spiritual realm, she had to actively separate herself from the mundane, everyday interruptions of the physical world. And it is exactly in this pure, completely distraction-free state that her world-shattering miracle finally arrives. We've seen how the incredible structure, the microscopic linguistic brilliance, and the profound lessons of vulnerability and spiritual focus in this text literally brought a Christian king to tears and saved a group of hunted refugees. So, the question we want to leave you with today is this. If the historical prologue of these miraculous births held the power to stop an execution and change the entire course of history, what profound power do these words hold for us when we face our own insurmountable odds today? Something to think about. Keep exploring, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next Explain.